Welcome back, everybody. Today we are looking at Chapter 14, Section 3, Cotton Kingdom in the South. Now, in our previous two videos, we looked at the North, and we looked at the economy of the North, and then how industrialization impacted the society and culture of the North. Well, for our next two videos, we're going to be shifting our focus to the South, and today specifically talking about cotton and its impact on the economy and life in the South as it was in the 1800s. And our essential question for today is, what role did cotton play in the economy of the South? And as you can see, there's already an audio recording for today, and the picture of today's audio recording is of a former school teacher, Mr. Eli Whitney. Name may sound familiar from our discussion about interchangeable parts, but he had a couple of other inventions that impacted life specifically in the South, and we will look at that after our key terms. And our key terms for today, we only have two real ones that we'll be looking at: boom and cultivate. And this is not boom in the onomatopoeia sense of an explosion, but boom meaning a period of swift economic growth, and cultivate, to prepare and use for planting crops. But first, as always, a question. What is your most favorite piece of clothing? Now, I have some favorite shirts and favorite shoes and favorite sweaters. I actually have a pair of boots that I've had since high school, and I'm actually wearing them right now. But if I could, I would wear jeans every single day. I don't know why I love my jeans, but I just do. And for some reason, they seem to get better the more that I wear them. And when I think of jeans and their influence on society, I think of Levi Strauss. And Levi Strauss was a man who moved to San Francisco to try and sell his durable cotton pants to miners and workers. And before that, most work clothing, especially pants, were made from wool. Can you imagine wearing jeans made out of wool?
Many inventions have shaped American culture and changed the way we look at the world. One was created in the mid-1800s, but is still very popular today. It's blue jeans. Levi Strauss was born in 1829 in Bavaria, which is part of present-day Germany. As a young man, he moved to America and settled in New York.
In 1853, young Bavarian immigrant Levi Strauss was living in New York City, and he decided to go to San Francisco during the gold rush to start his business on his own. So he made his way there across the Isthmus of Panama and opened his doors March 14, 1853.
But Strauss didn't plan to mine for gold. He sold canvas tents and wagon covers to the miners. One day, a man asked Strauss if he sold pants.
You've hit it over on Gold Bottom.
Looking for gold was hard work, and miners needed clothes that would last. This conversation inspired Strauss to make a pair of pants that would hold up under tough working conditions. In 1866, he started selling canvas pants. They were called Levi's, and the miners bought them faster than Strauss could make them. As more people bought the pants, Strauss received a lot of tips on ways to improve them. In 1873, Jacob Davis gave him an idea to make the pants even stronger. He suggested adding copper rivets to the pockets so they wouldn't rip. Strauss liked the idea and decided to use it. And many people had complained that the canvas wasn't comfortable. So Strauss switched from canvas to a heavy denim material that was dyed indigo blue. The miners liked the new material because the dark color wouldn't show stains. Today, we call them jeans, but in Strauss's time, people called the pants waist-high overalls. And in 1873, they sold for 22 cents a pair. By the end of that year, the demand for his product had skyrocketed. Strauss opened a plant in San Francisco and hired hundreds of workers to keep up with demand. Soon he opened 2 more plants in San Francisco, creating jobs for many Californians. When Strauss passed away in 1902, his company kept going. By the 1920s, the miners were gone, but cowboys and steel workers were buying Levi's. It became the leading brand in men's work pants. In the 1950s, after movie stars Marlon Brando and James Dean and rock and roll legend Elvis Presley were seen wearing them, jeans became a common item in all American closets.
Well, we're very fortunate. There aren't many companies in America that can say that they've been around for 150 years. In 1853, Levi Strauss opened the doors of his dry goods business, and here we are a century and a half later, and Levi's still exists as one of the most well-known and trusted brands in the world.
Inventions come in all shapes and sizes. The real measure of an invention is how it has shaped our culture and changed our lives.
The Stars and Stripes, Levi's jeans, and Coca-Cola. Wherever you go around the world, if you say America, those three images come to mind to most people. And so Levi's jeans are a part of our heritage. Levi's is part of the American DNA.
Now, we're not going to have an entire lesson about the gold rush again, but without an invention of Mr. Eli Whitney, cotton might never have been able to become as popular as it is today. And thanks to his invention, cotton is now one of the most important materials in our daily life, the touch, the feel of cotton. And let's look at the impact of cotton, and specifically the cotton gin. And here it is, the cotton gin. Now, think back to our discussions yesterday. We're getting back into mid-1800s North and South. Now, while industries were driving the economy and culture of the North, a different lifestyle had been developing in the South. The favorable climate and quality of land meant that agriculture could flourish more there. They had a much longer and much better growing season. Now, as the textile industries grew in the North and in Great Britain, there was an increasing need for cotton for these textile mills. And in the South, cotton was king. At first, Southern planters couldn't meet the demands of the Northern industries. Cotton farming was very tedious and very labor-intensive. It takes a lot to pick the seeds out of a cotton boll. But in 1793, our good friend and former school teacher, Mr. Eli Whitney, came up with this machine that could clean cotton about 50 times faster than doing it by hand. Now, Whitney's inventing the cotton gin, which is short for engine, similar to the spinning jenny, was short for engine. The cotton gin used two rollers with wire teeth that could very easily separate the seeds from the cotton boll. And with this new invention, Southern farmers were able to produce much more cotton at a much faster rate, and in turn, pull a huge profit. Now, this led to a boom, or as we said, a swift growth in cotton production from about 6,000 bales in 1792 to over 2 million bales in 1850. So, as we're seeing in this chart, with the growth of cotton boom, there was a negative side to this expansion. Thanks to the cotton gin, Southern economy expanded, and with that, with more cotton being grown, more slaves were needed to plant and pick the cotton. Now, the work could be done by paid laborers, but why pay laborers when you could own that labor? So the work of slaves brought more profits to the owners, who in turn brought more slaves to bring in more profits.
Even though the first mechanical spinning and weaving machines in America were copied from English machines, one truly American invention, called the cotton gin, helped revolutionize the textile industry. Cotton plants produce excellent fibers, and in America's southern states, cotton was very cheap to produce because unpaid slaves were used to grow and harvest the crop. Yet even though the demand for cotton was great, before the invention of the cotton gin, it was not widely used in textiles. That was because cotton fibers are contained in the plant's seed pods, and before the fiber can be spun into threads, the seeds must be removed. Cleaning cotton was a very slow process when done by hand. But after 1793, the year Eli Whitney invented his cotton gin, simply by turning a crank, it was possible to remove as many seeds from raw cotton in a single day as 50 people could do using just their hands. Because the cotton gin made the fibers more readily available, there was a great increase in cotton production. Consequently, there was an increase in the number of slaves working on plantations as well. After the invention of the cotton gin, the raising of cotton rapidly became the backbone of the economy in the southern United States.
By the 1800s, slavery had become concentrated in the South, where plantation farming required many hands. White Southerners who grew up with blacks as part of their households seldom thought to question the owning of slaves, but slaves were seen by some white Southerners as human beings like themselves. They felt it was wrong for one human being to own another. Indeed, back in the late 1700s, Southerners had led the movements for emancipation. But the invention in 1793 of the cotton gin, a simple machine which made possible for the first time the large-scale production of cotton, ended all thoughts of freeing the slaves. Cotton production soared, up from 5 million pounds in 1793 to more than 22 billion by 1860.
Jump down, turn around, pick a bale of cotton.
Reliance on slave labor grew accordingly.
Jump down, turn around, pick a bale a day.
As Southern prosperity became so dependent on cotton, Southerners found it increasingly difficult to suggest abolishing slavery. Slaves represented a substantial capital investment. By 1860, a single farmhand might have cost his master as much as $1,000. Actually, the South still had the economy of a colony. With few factories, the South exported its raw materials, even for processing, and had to import almost all of its manufactured goods. Enterprising northern shipping, banking, and industrial interests grew rich from handling the South's raw materials.
But what about the rest of the agriculture economy? Now, even though cotton was the #1 plant, cotton was king in the South, it was not the only profitable crop. Planters found that the soil could wear out if cotton was planted in the same place every single year, so they would switch it up and introduce other crops to help preserve the soil in certain areas. Rice, sugar, tobacco were also grown on large plantations, as well as most of the nation's livestock at this time. And the plantation system dominated rice and sugar production because small farmers couldn't afford the expensive irrigation systems for rice or the expensive machinery that was needed to process sugar from sugarcane. However, large tobacco plantations kind of gave way to smaller tobacco farms because small farmers, it was very easy to turn a profit with this crop. And in areas that were unsuitable for crops, hogs, oxen, horses, mules, and beef cattle were raised. Like I said, most of the nation's livestock at this time. And our next video is going to look at the plantation system.
In the South, there were very few cities with factories. The Southern way of life had grown to become centered around small farms and plantations. A plantation is a large farm that uses slaves to care for its crops. When a worker is owned by his employer, it is called slave labor. Even though most of the Southern farmers were too poor to own slaves, slavery was a necessity on a large plantation. Many of the white Southerners chose to identify with the elegant and rich lifestyle of the plantation owners and accepted this as their way of life. Cotton and tobacco represented nearly all of the South's wealth. The rich Southern planters also looked to the new states in the West to expand their plantation empires and way of life. Many Southerners understood the necessity to pressure Congress to admit the new states as slave states.
Now, it may seem like there's a complete division between industries were only in the North and agriculture was only in the South. That's not true, but kind of as a generalization, the economy in the North depended more on industry than it did in the South. However, there were areas in the South where industries did develop, kind of to a point, but only those industries that really directly supported agriculture were able to survive. Agricultural tools and goods were produced, and some Southerners tried to move away from agriculture and promote industry, such as William Gregg, who had built a cotton mill in South Carolina and kind of fashioned it after the Lowell mills in Massachusetts. Railroad equipment, machinery, tools, and cannons were also produced, but on a much smaller scale than they were in the North. And the manufacturing was still far behind that of the manufacturing in the North. And a lot of that had to do with the people who were holding on to a lot of the wealth in the South. The wealthy planters preferred to invest in slaves rather than in industry, and slavery in turn reduced the need for industry. So industry did kind of grow at this time, but southern cities also grew at this time, but the large part of the population remained rural. Cities like New Orleans, Louisiana, Charleston, South Carolina, Richmond, Virginia started to grow but faced poor housing and some of the sanitation issues that a lot of the northern cities were facing. But again, on a much smaller scale. And because industry never fully developed in the South, the South came to depend on the North and Europe much more and more and more. Southern planters borrowed money from northern banks, and most of the housewares, farm tools, and machines were made in northern factories. And in the South, a lot of people resented this. They resented this economic dependence on the North, but this booming cotton industry kind of helped to still instill some confidence in Southerners. They say, we may not have the factories that they do in the North, but look at all the area that we have, how beautiful it is, and look at the booming cotton industry and how much you depend on our southern cotton. And as long as cotton was booming, the future looked bright.
The Old Northwest is not the only area experiencing population growth. In parts of the Old South, overplanting and erosion force ambitious farmers to search for more productive land in the South and West.
What Whitney's gin does is to make the plantation system feasible in the inland South. It used to be that the only kind of cotton in America that would grow needed a very simple kind of gin to sort of squeeze the seeds out, but it would only grow on the coast of South Carolina and Georgia. The invention of the cotton gin was designed to separate the fibers from the seeds of a special kind of cotton that would grow everywhere. And when that machine was perfected, it was possible to grow this fiber in the inland South and not just in these subtropical areas on the coast. Well, that meant that you could expand the slave plantation system into areas where it had never gone before.
Cotton demands fairly large plantations, and so the workforces grow. And the size of black communities who are on individual plantations becomes fairly large. Prior to the emergence of cotton is king, that's the phrase, the large plantations tended to be, fairly selective and random. But that's going to become standard in what we call the Deep South, states like Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, parts of East Texas. The investments are enormous for the planters in terms of land, in terms of workforce, and they have to have a return. Very often, people's economic survival is riding on the ability to use these workforces in these lands to yield crops. If it works, you really are set.
But if you bet the wrong way and the price goes down, you can also lose your shirt. So that Americans go west to find liberty for themselves, but they find themselves in a much more unpredictable situation than they originally thought. They find themselves, sometimes at least, the prisoner of international markets rather than the beneficiary of them. Historians are coming to call that moment the market revolution, not because nobody ever did marketing before, but that large numbers of Americans who thought they were more insulated from what international trade was all about were suddenly much more hooked into it than they had been before. This offers tremendous opportunity for some people and tremendous risks as well. So it's this liminal kind of a scary moment where things could go either way and you just don't know what might happen.
Which brings us to everybody's favorite part of the day, the assignment. Now, there is no written assignment with this particular lesson, but you will be responsible for this information on the upcoming Chapter 14 test. So please be sure to read through this section in the text, and it will help to fill in any gaps from this lesson. And pay special attention to this chart that shows the growth of cotton production and the growth of slavery and how they kind of mimicked each other, because you will need to know that for the test. You will see this again. And like always, have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you again very, very soon.